Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, and this evening I will be joined by my very dear old friend, Gerard, JollyScholar888, and the subject of our discussion this evening will be flamenco, but our own personal experiences of the esoteric dimensions of flamenco. I certainly won't be speaking from a position of any kind of particular expertise. I've been very much into it for a very long time. And I've had the good fortune to be able to hang out with real flamencos, real Andalusians, and people who really can be said to be masters of this exceedingly challenging art. But I myself am not one of those masters. So in all that follows, understand that I am an enthusiast. I don't even speak Spanish, so I can't even properly be said to be an aficionado. However, I've been around people who are. And so this evening, if you happen to be from Andalusia or you're some badass flamenco, you can do what you always do, even with people who are the best among you, which is you can all make fun of each other. So certainly you can make fun of me as well. That's a big thing that the Gypsies and Andalusians like to do to each other. Just part and parcel of that scene. Anyway, we're going to be getting to it in just a moment. I want to go through the boilerplate stuff first. Do let me know, is the audio good and is the video good? While I'm waiting for you to let me know about that, let me say, please follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do it on BitChute, both channels. You can do it on YouTube. I really ask you kindly to do it over on Odyssey. Please do it on Odyssey, which is a great platform that's up and coming. You can also follow me on Gab, on Twitter, on Telegram. And most importantly, I want to thank all of the people who support this channel. Let me get over here and share my screen so that you can see the Praetorian Chads who make all of this possible. I'm going to share that screen. Let me open this up for you so you can see these mighty persons. They all deserve their place in Valhalla. I want to thank every single one of them for how mighty they are and for their ongoing support of the channel. Okay. And buy my books. This is Vinculum. This book is a science fiction tale set in Istanbul in the year, I think, 2076. It's about a book thief who is pursued by corporate hitmen and an esoteric sect of assassins. Very interesting, I believe, anyway. And this is Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. This is my collection of poems. You can find it on Amazon under the name Oliver Timken Perrin. The other book, Vinculum, you can find under the name Oliver Perrin. So there is that. Now, I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes to come in here. But in order to make this happen, I need to make sure that I am able to play this clip and that the audio comes through. So I'm going to play just a moment of it. Can you guys tell me whether or not you can hear it? Hopefully this isn't going to be a boomer horror show. But tell me now quickly if you can hear this audio. Is that audio? Can you hear the music, ladies and gentlemen? Let me know. Is that audible to you? I hope that it is. Waiting. Do we have, oh, excellent, good. It sounds like you got audio and video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this tune. This is a song written, performed, and produced by my good friend Gerard, the guest who is about to appear, who you've seen over on the side a couple times as I flip the windows around. So we're going to listen to this really quickly. Then I'll bring my guest on. And then we'll look at a couple of video clips, and then we'll get into the discussion. So check it out, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Hopefully, I should be audible again. That was my friend Gerard's piece. Of course, that's not traditional flamenco. There's a bit of fusion going on, but I like it very much. So let's bring our guest on. Let me unmute him here. However it is I do that. There we go. Sorry, Gerard, you weren't audible up to this point. I had you on mute. Hello, sir, and thank you for joining us. How are you? Gerard, JollyScholar888.
Excellent, Oliver. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. Is there anything really quickly you want to say about that song?
Oh, well, the piece is fusion, obviously. This is not flamenco. However, any flamenco would recognize, oh, yeah, we see what he's doing. I mean, it's not like it's off in left field, but it's not flamenco. It's a fusion, kind of imitating a Middle Eastern sound, sort of a taksim is what I was kind of basing it on.
Oh, you're trying to get it to sound like a mezmer or a zorna.
No. That taksim would just be a form.
Right, but in terms of the Middle Eastern aspect, I mean, weren't you?
Oh, you mean the guy with the saxophone, the soprano sax? He was a guy that played in the klezmer band.
Klezmer.
Sorry, klezmer band. I saw him playing in the square in Alexandria City, and I just walked up to him, and we started talking, and I knew that because of the way that they played a lot they played in harmonic minor, but it was close enough that he could adapt it to the Phrygian. So after a few rehearsals and stuff, I thought he did quite well.
Yeah, that sounded great, man. And I guess this is a good point to jump in and say again, as I started to say at first, that this is going to be my take, such as it is, on flamenco and sort of secret things, esoteric things that I've looked for, and in some cases that I think I have found in it. Gerard has more experience with this. He's a Spanish speaker, native Spanish speaker. He's been to Spain. He's studied this stuff. He's also mastered, aspects of the guitar and has better understanding of music. Certainly than I do. I mean, far surpassing my PhD in ethnomusicology, etc. So even in this case, where he certainly can lay claim to being a kind of aficionado,
I can go with that.
Right. Nevertheless, in both our cases, I think it's fair to say, Gerard, that we're just talking about our own personal impressions. So, if you hear someone from the living tradition in Andalusia or a gypsy or a proper flamencos, tell you something different, go with what they say. They're the authorities on their own tradition.
Flamenco is argue. So
yeah.
They can pick of any position.
Right. I just need to put that,
that on anything. So, it's a great subject.
Right. So that's just my caveat up front so that people don't think that, anyway, it's been said. There it is. So, again, I'm also going to give a little caveat. I'm just going to throw a couple of clips in here. One is actually driving around in Gerard's beautiful RV with
1973 vintage.
Yeah, some with some flamenco buddies, and this is not designed to show everybody what the absolute pinnacle of flamenco is, though there are two very talented guys involved. This is just to show what the lifestyle is like.
Right, just hanging out.
Right, and then I was going to show a little clip of me with this dance performance, which is, it's not even truly a Bulletius letra that the woman's singing. I don't even know if you could even say it's properly Bulletius, but it was fun anyway. And it's just, it's by way of, showing our interest in this and background. So I'm going to show one other clip here. Let's do this one, Gerard, the one in your RV from that Christmas. Was that Christmas Eve or Christmas night?
It was right around Christmas, yeah.
Yeah, it was either Christmas Eve or Christmas
night.
There
were deer going across the road. We tried to get them, but I don't think they ever showed up.
Yeah, that's actually when you're going to see a point where the music is actually quite good, and I turn the camera around to look out the front of the RV. That's because Gerard wouldn't stop telling me to turn the camera around to look at deer when I was trying to film the clip. But anyway, old friends, this is how it works. So let's see if you guys can hear this.
Platicando mi pena consuelo siente nada más que me esté mirando al bebé de compañera nada más que me esté mirando Ale José Ricardo me vino de querer. Ahora me vino de querer. Ella perdió la cabeza, gitana por tu querer. Valga medio de mi alma, gitana por tu querer. Estoy queriendo una niña y no me la da su madre. De amor eterno me augura, aunque le salga uno no me pare. Me sigue,
Pasa.
una estrella chiquitita, chiquitita pero
Vale.
una estrella chiquitita, chiquitita pero firme. Ay, por Dios Tomasa, por Dios Tomasa, por Dios Tomasa, por Dios Tomasa. No tenga vas a ver conmigo, no tenga vas a.
Ricardo. Pasa. Vale. Vale.
A ver, era lo que sabe. Poco te enamora verde,
Vale.
poco te enamora verde. Se me ha cabito una pina, hasta el corazón me duele.
Vale.
Ha medido de Jerez. Dame vino de Jerez. Le perdió la cabeza, gitanita por tu querer. Le perdió la cabeza, gitanita por tu querer.
Vale. Vale. Ando drum. Ey, esa. Oh, ey, casa.
más.
Ole.
A la que impone más. De la campana de la cárcel cuando rompe la zona. De la campana de la cárcel cuando rompe la zona. Pero Tomasa, por Dios, Tomasa, vete conmigo, no tenga pasa, vete conmigo, no tenga pasa.
Ole.
All right. And that, hang on, I got to turn your mute off there, Gerard. Sorry. Where's the little button for that? Hang on, there we go. Sorry, speak. I think you're audible.
No, what else do you do when you're driving in the middle of the night in an RV?
Right. And now I should add, of course, the driver is absolutely not included in what I'm talking about, but everyone was very drunk. So, you know, that's people singing and playing guitar while in a moving car, very drunk. So, you know, Merry Christmas to everyone. There's one other example I want to show. Now, that one is just to show what sort of like life when you're hanging around with flamencos can be like. But it's
all the time, all night, everywhere we go. I mean, if you're hanging out, that's what you do.
Yeah, if your batteries don't burn out and you don't just drop dead. Yeah. But that's I wouldn't call that a juerga, but it's verging on that realm where you're with your own people and you're doing your own thing. Now, because we're going to talk about juergas, and I think the original meaning of that term, Gerard, is something like a drunken or dissipated party, right? It generally means like people,
like the origin of the word itself, or
yeah, I mean, just how a normal Spaniard who's not a flamenco, when they say juerga, I've heard it just means like a raucous party.
But it's very specific to flamenco. It's not any kind of party.
Right. Well,
and it's where there's improvisation going on all night, as opposed to
right, and it's more private.
They tend to be, yeah.
Right. So on the one hand, what I'm showing you is just a terrible superficial example of where that can go. There's plenty of stuff online you can see where you'll see like, you know, really great, well-known gypsy performers or Andalusi.
Of course, Ricardo is kick-ass.
Yeah, and Jose is quite good too. Yeah,
very young there. Now that's a long time ago. Jose
right.
Now kick-ass on his singing too.
So on the other hand, you've got the idea of the tablao, or the thing that you see on stage, which is distinct and something that you can kind of put up on the, you can set up there against juerga, the idea of the private party that goes all night, that can get much more intimate and or crazy, where people are drinking and the emotional intensity can get very, very high, right? And then over on the other side, you've got the idea of the tablao, or the spectacle that appears on stage. And Gerard will be talking a little bit later about how these things can be seen as sort of two poles of expression within the
structure. So one is structured to the detail, the more tablao. And by the way, juerga can happen in the middle of the street in Spain.
Right, and it's quite spontaneously.
And the thing, they're not structured, and we'll go into that because it's the music. It's improvised versus very, very choreography dancing and very structured down to the last, 16th of a, dotted 16th note.
Right. Now, and again, what I'm about to show you here, this is just me screwing around at some student show. I'm just showing you this because I don't want to deal with copyright stuff of going to like, real badass dancers. But, you can go see, any number of folks on YouTube, and I've linked to a number of them at times on Twitter, and they just make everything that you'll see that I'm doing just look ridiculous because they're so accomplished and so good. I don't even cover the finish line, but it's my content. It shows you me playing around with it in my life and how much fun it is for me. So, on that basis, I'll share it with you, and then we can get over into the talking. So let me mute you again, G-Man, and then get over here to run this clip real quick. This is a very short one. This is basically with Bulerías, you'll have the main performers and stuff, the main singers and guitarists and things, and then at the end, people generally get together for what they'll call a fin de fiesta, which is where sort of everybody has a little free moment to get up and sort of do their thing. It's a way of sort of tapping each person who participated, and even if they're just a palmero in the background, which is most of the time on stage, that's all I am.
Almost player.
Right, but playing the hands.
And the fin de fiesta is end of party.
Right. And so generally everybody will get up and you'll sort of move down the line and each person will have their opportunity to kind of come forward and do something quick. So this is the end of the show and you'll see me doing that here. So there we go.
Looking good, Oliver.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is what it is. It's each person just comes up and you're supposed to get in and out of there very quickly because other people need to have their time to do it. And, you know, they hate you if you get up there and try and hog the stage. And in my case, you know, I'm not bold enough to try to do so around people who dance better than I do. So anyway, you have sort of a general introduction there. I'm going to top my beverage here. And light myself a delicious tobacco.
I can't smoke a cigar here. I'm not.
Good. It's about time that you be punished having to watch, since normally I have to watch you puffing away on your cigar. Before we get started in the sort of esoteric aspects, I think what we need, Gerard, is you to come in and sort of tell everyone what the hell it is, basically, for people who don't know what flamenco is. You know, we can't get deep into it. And as you said, a lot of people argue about it. There are a lot of things that are sort of, you know, up in the air, you know, like even the origin of the term flamenco. Some people say, well, it's because they're fiery like flame, you know, or other people say they stand like they stand like a flamingo. And other people say, well, it's Flamengo, which means fugitive peasant from Arabic. And then other people say, no, it's because they came down from Flemish territories. And that's, you know, so a lot of this is very much up in the air, but sort of as a general picture, just to get everybody oriented, can you
Well, yeah, there's certain things that are just true. Like, where does it come from? It's from Andalusia. Then you can say, well, it has heavy Middle Eastern influences. Well, of course, you know, the Spanish occupation of Spain for so many centuries. But there's a very heavy influence also from, especially the northern Spain, especially even from the northern European traditions. But it's from Andalusia. That's where it's from. That's the only place it's from. It's not even from northern Spain. Flamenco is definitely from Andalusia, the whole southern area of Spain. The flamenco that we know today is really the forms, and that's a really key thing to understand about flamenco, is the tree of forms. But anyways, the forms as we know it now is not that old. It's from about the late 1800s, really early 1900s. From that's when these forms became kind of codified to the degree that, well, people started writing stuff down and people started recording.
And we have from like the 18th century, second half of the 18th century, we have descriptions of what are definitely flamenco.
Somewhat like, they're not sure, but yes. Oh no, there's lots of literature pointing way back before that, but a lot of forms we're not sure about anymore. Like even the seguidillas, we're not really sure. The seguidillas that we have today, was that the one that was in the past?
Well, this is a big thing. Before you go any further, what are forms? What do you mean when you say forms?
Yeah, that's to understand flamenco. You have, and if you do understand flamenco, you also understand how music has been done all over the planet among humanity forever. The idea of music being written down and sung in a certain way, the same way every time, is very, very new. But well, let me correct that. It's not necessarily very new in some ways, because all civilizations have developed what they call art music. And the art music tends to be very stratified, very structured, written out. I hope Semigog is still there. But anyways, and so the form is let's just say if those of you who understand blues, right? There's a 12-bar blues form. You know that 12 bars. You can count. You can feel it coming. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you know when the first change is going to come. When we go to 4 chord, you go back to the 1. All right. So that form you can do a lot in. It moves around in a circle inside. You have to interiorize it. So you see everything coming, and you know when things are going to come. You also know when somebody takes it slightly into a different direction. So these forms are the basis of all Andalusian music, the flamenco. It's called the tree of forms, and they cover many different emotional, we don't want to say states, but emotional structures, right? They structure the emotions because you have emotional structure, musical structure, and behavioral structure, and you can't separate the three. So the forms come in flamenco, the heavy forms are in 12. We don't want to get into much detail, but it's like a clock going around. Everybody knows there are certain things that can happen at certain points, but don't happen at other points. So when this thing is moving around through the whole group, everybody sinks in. If it's a fast one, so certain things can happen in certain places, but they don't happen in other places. And only certain things happen because it's understood in the tradition. Now, those forms with different situations through life, through times, through change, what they'll do is they'll morph into another form. We have like bulerias, then we have solear. There's 2 different ones. One is we would call, again, we want to stay away from emotions like sad and happy, but let's just say for right now, a darker emotion, solear alone, bulerias, which is kind of like to make fun of, to laugh at. That's what Oliver was doing there at the end of bulerias. And so the bulerias has a certain emotional form, structure. The solear does, and they're both on the 12 count. And what happens is that with time, they'll start moving and changing the solear because different situations. Sometimes it's composed deliberately, but usually it's not. And then what you'll have is a solear por bulerias. But solear doesn't go away. Bulerias doesn't go away. They're still there on the tree. But you can see then comes another branch. It's called solear por bulerias. And it has a really cool, right in the middle. It's a very heavy, it's a very cool groove. And the solear is different, the bulerias is different. And so you have all of these forms, and that tree of forms is living, moving through time and changing. So there are some forms that people have like you see it in literature. There was something like that. Nobody does it anymore. Or somebody tries to resuscitate it because an old grandfather or somebody maybe said, oh yes, I used to sing that, and then blah, blah, blah. Then that'll come back maybe will come back, maybe will make it his way in. And maybe somebody will do a different one. Like we have now a kind of rumba tangos, which is, I don't know if it's going to stay around very long, but it's a combination of the rumba beat and the tango. So they put the 2 together, and some people like it, some people don't. Maybe 50 years from now, nobody will play it. There was an old gypsy. Again, we'll talk about Gypsy versus Andalus, but you don't really want to get in there. Right? That's a real quagmire. But it was called the. Let me see. But it was talking about the hakebari, right? Which hakebari was the great hoax, which is when the Gypsies moved through Europe. It's another interesting, fascinating subject. But this one, Oliver, just start talking, so I'll have to remember this one.
Well, I mean, the particular...
Debla, it was the Debla. So the Debla, nobody knew what the Debla was. They didn't really believe they even existed anymore. And then they started coming up with lyrics and things, and really, this was totally, and it's about the great goddess. Deblicabari was the words that came down to us. Now, nobody really knows what it sounds like anymore. And some people will sing that Debla to what we call a seguiria. But the words and everything are very much about the great goddess, which points to really, really deep in the past, and more than likely Gypsy past. Definitely, because Deblicabari is Roma. It's Roma language. It's from, in Spain, they call it Caló. But there's a huge tradition in southern Spain, especially of the goddess and mixed with the Mary, and that's a whole other subject too. So anyways, there you have it. The tree of forms is a living tree with all of these different emotional colors, and they move through time, and the community will absorb them. So when you're at a huerga, somebody starts doing what they're doing tango, everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows there's all kinds of letras meaning verses that you can apply. There's choruses, all kinds of called estribillos, that people can just spontaneously start singing. They know where to stop singing and where not. If the dancer starts to dance, people know, okay, she's coming in. There's a signal she can give that will say, okay, the estribillo's coming now. So these are things you learn with the tradition, and the tradition is alive and functioning, and it moves through time, but it moves through the bodies of people. Without the bodies of people, it doesn't exist.
And it's exceedingly difficult to get your head around if you haven't been raised in it for a number of reasons.
Right.
The first among them is that the rhythm or the meter, what they call compás, which the term goes back to the Latin root of compás, to march in step, but it's to mark time. And their rhythmic structures, some of them are easier, like a tango's, it's and I'm just giving you the most basic. You won't hear just that. It will be ornamented. It will be changed. They'll drop parts out and the rest. The 4/4 is generally easy for people to pick up. Tarantos is sixes, isn't it, Gerard? I'm trying to remember.
Tientos.
No. Tientos is a slower 4. But I'm trying to think of some of the ones that they count in 6.
That's way up, because that's actually Cante Libre. You would say something like seguirías or bulerías.
Well, that's 12s. I'm looking for something that's strictly in the sets of 6. But anyway, so the point is to see, I'll even get lost. But like with bulerías, for example, like Gerard's saying, they'll count it on a clock. But just to give you some sense of how hard it can be to get your head around it, they'll tell you, well, it's 12, but you start counting on 12. So you say 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 1. And then they'll be like, they can split it because 12 has so many factors, so it can be subdivided. So you can count your 12s based on 2s, based on 3s, based on 6s, or you can count it in a full 12 cycle, but be aware that it's a 12 cycle where you start counting on 12, and in order to have it work properly, you're supposed to end on 10. So
and many flamencos don't use that counting, right?
Right. The best way I ever heard was from our mutual friend who's now dead, Jesus Montoya. Good old friend. I was asking him, because he's for real. He's from Sevilla. He was a great singer. He's raised in the tradition. He was like an encyclopedia.
He's a gypsy from the famous Montoya family.
Right.
He's the one that taught me how to sing flamenco.
And I'd say to him, how do they count flamencos? And he's like, I'll tell you. This is how you count flamenco. Bulerías. Sorry, I was like, how do you count bulerías? He's like, 1. He's like, you count it as 1. Just to screw with me. But the point was that's the fundamental unit that you can't get past. That's the one that's the deepest root of it. They can count it in a million different ways. You have to feel it. And you cannot learn about it in a book. I cannot emphasize this enough. And
you must have that interest, because if you want to mess up a party and get people pissed at you, you can play a wrong chord on the guitar. You can sing out of tune. But what you can't do is get out of compás.
Everything is based on that structure.
You'll find yourself in a room full of people, and then you'll turn around, there's nobody there.
And
they'll hit you, or the dancer will throw a shoe at you.
Yeah.
You don't get out of compás. Compás, you have to be there. You have to be cool. You have to know to stay right in it. Sing a bit out of tune, it's okay. Come in at the exactly wrong place. Because we've had, like you said, marking. Marcando means to mark time. So if the dancer is dancing and she's okay, she gave her signal, you're supposed to come in singing, but you were lighting your cigarette or your cigar, and you missed that part. You're supposed to come in. It's okay, because unless you're in choreography, it's why many of us hate choreography. But if you're not choreography, she just look at you, hey idiot, this is the time, and you go, okay.
And she or he will wait until the next one comes around. That can be the entry point.
She'll mark time and just marcando, and while she marks around, you come in, then you come in, and then It's fine.
But you don't come in just anywhere.
No, you cannot come in just anywhere, because then
Yes.
she'll look at you and come upside the head or something.
And I used to, this was a joke of mine, but I used to think that the smallest possible unit of time that could not be further subdivided was the time that elapsed between when a light turned green in Istanbul and when people started honking at you. But I upgraded that entirely. The shortest possible unit of time that cannot be subdivided further, that is the shortest possible amount of time, is the amount of time between when you fuck up on compás and everybody in the room kind of looks over like, what the fuck, you have to be on with it. And it's very precise. When you get into
stay out, you have to know your place. If you know you're not at the level that's going on there, especially with contras and things, you just stay out, just sit there.
Right.
Just very
because you'll think it's just like audience clap along.
Right.
And it's not like audience clap along at all.
It infuriates them more than some bozo in the background. Just, yeah.
Yeah, we call that spanking your hand. Yes. Or the best way I heard it, Genevieve called it popcorn, because it sounds like popcorn in a microwave. You're like, what the fuck is this? I cannot. Where's my?
Well, did you in the clip with the Joselito, who's so good at that, right? He's doing the sword dust, but when he went into his claras, how precise and how well he does that.
Yeah, and remember, there are people who make that precision look weak because they're so. I mean, now, yeah.
Love the way Joselito and his brother did palmas.
Yeah, and they're great at it. And Jose's better than that still, and he can double it up and everything. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a basic idea of flamenco. You got sets of forms. There's forms, if I understand them correctly. They have
forms.
They have
all related, and they
right
time, and it comes from Andalusia, Spain, and nowhere else. Gypsies had a lot to do with it, but it's Andalusian. It's Andalusian music. It's not anybody else's. It's the people of Andalusia, which is composed of Gypsies, indigenous Andalusians that go back. If you've read Alan Joseph's Walls of Spain, you'll see that the Andalusian
White Walls of Spain.
Isn't that what I said? Sorry, White Walls of Spain. They were already known for their music in the Roman era. They were called the musician from Cadiz. In fact, the Calliope Venus was actually a dancer from Cadiz, what we call Cadiz. So the Andalusians, the Spaniards, the Arabs, and
Jews, Mozarabic stuff.
The Jews had involvement in it also. And so all these people came together, but that rich tradition is Andalusian. And these forms are Andalusian, and they go back, but nobody knows how far.
Right. And it's very likely it's very far indeed in terms of some of the elements of it. And then I just add that in terms of those forms, there's a metrical component. There's the whole business of the modes or the keys, the melody, the harmony, and the rest.
Which
they have
scary. Yeah.
Right.
Melody, the compás, the movement of the dance, and then the last edition, the modern one, is the guitar and the keys.
And there is the business of the letras themselves, the forms for the sung elements.
Yeah, but
because they follow structures.
Yeah, they are. The coplas are structured in there's a traditional old, but that's not typically Andalusian necessarily, but it's the octosyllabic, which is octosyllabic, 8 syllables and 4 lines.
Right, but there will be a way that the letters
you can cram them around. You can move them in different forms, and then you can take something. Remember that Sevillanas that I sing. That it's a tongue twister, right? There's way more than 8 syllables there. Because you have to. The basic thing is that you sing in compás.
Right, and then you can break any rule as long as it's not that one. And if you're really great, there are even compás games you can play, but not ones that threaten the ability of the group to cooperate, because the compás itself is like a fundamental structure that permits all of the other ways in which they can spontaneously do anything. That's the most important thing. Now, for the choreographed singers, there will be certain limitations, but the real measure of whether or not someone is advanced or skilled or capable with flamenco is whether or not you can put them all in a room together and they can just start doing something even though they've never played together before. And that's a fundamental aspect of it.
And you don't have to be very sophisticated, because in Spain, like when I went on the Rocio, people just did that on the street corners, passing time every day. You just have to have it in you. You just have to have the system, those flamenco forms in you, and you have to, be familiar with the repertoire at least. You can make up your own, but also just you have to join in and be familiar when people are all of a sudden singing this estribillo, this chorus, to sing along with it because you know that chorus. And somebody over there sings this one, well, you know that one because you start singing along. But very average people do this all the time.
Right, but they're for the most part people who are raised in it.
Oh, absolutely.
From literally from childhood, and that's another thing that we're going to touch on here. And then a last piece to put on this is that you can spend your life and focus all your energy on a single palo or form and become known for that. They're big enough. Each one is big enough and complex enough that they require attention on their own. You can
be masterful at one or two. The modern ones really like to be like what they call completo, know all of the forms. But in the past, that wasn't really always true. A lot of people specialized. Now, some people don't take Bambino very seriously, right? But Bambino was a master of rumba, and rumberos love Bambino. But his other thing that he was masterful at was bulerías. And so all of his albums were just rumbas and bulerías. But man, was he good.
The main point I want to get across is that there are scores of forms, and any one of them is quite deep, and you can spend pretty much as much time as you want to on any given single form, of which there are scores.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for someone from the outside, it's difficult to get your head around how vast a lot of this material is. So, like, for once, I was sitting around outside of Starbucks once with Jesus, and he's the guy from the Montoya clan that Gerard was talking about, and he just started talking about Sevillanas, and he just started playing knuckles on the tabletop. And he's like, well, this one's from here. And he's like, sings a little bit of it. And this is a guy who needed help. And I don't know how it was with Spanish, but with English, he'd be like, come over here, Oliver, help me read this. You know, he's not particularly literate, wasn't a big book guy. But as soon as you sort of got past the surface level, he was literally an encyclopedia of all these forms and types. And he would show you the different examples of how it's sung here and how this changes. And what's
right. That's the Sevillanas.
Yeah, and that's one palo, one form.
Fandangos is a whole family. That many people, that's all they do is fandangos. All they do is sevillanas. Other people, all they do is bulerías.
Right. Some people are just rumberos, you know, playing rumbas. Yeah. So anyway, that's an idea of its size and its scale. So I wanted to just cover a few things of my own, Gerard, here that are just little observations that I made about how things work. I mean, when I came into this, I was very much into magic and the occult and all this sort of thing. And the first thing that came to my mind, because I'm coming from the outside, is I'm like, wait a minute, gypsies are heavily associated with flamenco in Spain. But what else are gypsies heavily associated with? They're heavily associated with fortune telling, with the occult, street theft, you know. But they're very heavily associated with, you know, fortune telling and the occult and this kind of stuff. And I said, well, wait a minute, what? Wouldn't you expect to see some dimension of that in their music? Now, again, it's not only theirs. It's very important to understand that, but it's theirs too. Let's put it that way. And so would you not expect to see some dimension of that in this deep art form? And so I went looking for it in a lot of ways. And you'll find that there is this one thing that gets talked about in flamenco, which is this idea of duende, right? And there are other like sort of weird terms, like they'll talk about soniquete, which is sort of like the flavor of the sound or whatever. And some people will come along and say, oh, soniquete is just, you know, whether you put a little swing on it, which isn't really accurate because flamenco generally doesn't have any swing.
Soniquete is a technical term. It's more like a cool swing, a groove, a cool groove.
It's the groove. Where is the groove?
Duende is not that. Duende is
right. But I'm pointing out that there are these multiple terms that are kind of really hard to pin down. Whereas anybody who's been raised in it will just be like, oh yeah, duh. Right. Duende is a weird one, though, because you get poets like Lorca talking about it. It's the idea that there is some sort of primeval spirit or some sort of specifically phonic, like from the earth spirit. Right. And you have to understand that a lot of this stuff in flamenco, it involves marking rhythms not only with your hands, but also with the feet and essentially playing the floor with your feet. And that involves things like llamadas, which are calls, and they can signal that a dancer is about to do something or that a sequence has come to an end and another sequence is beginning, that kind of thing. But there's also the idea that they call it a llamada, which is a call. Like, I mean, in Spanish, you could say llamada. It's a call on a telephone, right?
Or like in Voudon, there's a certain thing that the drummers do that's a call.
Right, and they also have ground signs where they put those veves on the ground to call the spirits up, right? So I think it's at least worth noting. Again, ask an Andalusian about it, ask a flamenco about it. Half of them might say that we're just full of shit as a Christmas turkey. So this is just our take, but there is a certain aspect where they're stomping the ground as a part of a call. And one of the things that's recognized in the music is that certain people will be sort of seized by duende, and they will be possessed after a fashion. But a very distinct thing that Gerard and I have discussed many times, so maybe in just a second I'll turn it over to you here, Gerard, is the idea that in Voudon, and many of the different systems that come out of West Africa, you get over to the New World, they have variations like Pontos Riscados, you get Santeria, you get Condomble, there are many of these other variations, Voudon. They all come out of West African, or for the most part, come out of West African Orisha systems. Those involve playing of these intense rhythms, which are polyrhythms, unlike, for the most part, the flamenco stuff.
And they're attached to certain deities, certain spirits.
Right. And so if you're doing something to Erzuli, it's going to have a certain rhythm. It's a goddess, right?
And
And associated with the sea, right? Or you might have Erzule Dantor, who is Erzule Bucket of Blood, right? Who has these other sort of things there. You have Ogun, right? Or you have Shango, like who's more like a Thor or a Zeus figure with lightning and the rest, and war, that being Shango. Or you'll have things with like Gede, who is the god of death, right? And yes, and so you have these ideas of playing a rhythm that's supposed to elicit something from deep within the people that possesses them. But what you get with the African systems is the archetype comes and seizes the person. And they call it being ridden, which is why they call them divine horsemen. And in that system, what possesses you is something bigger than you that comes from the collective that is one of these god forms. Now, with flamenco, what is very distinct and is nothing like that, and I think is ultimately a part of the West, because even people who want to knock gypsies, they're Indo-Europeans. They speak an Indo-European language. They're focused on things like coppersmithing, blacksmithing, raising horses, and they're nomadic. They're Indo-European. They're absolutely Indo-European. And because of the nature of their life and ways, they've preserved cultural elements that go deep, deep, deep back into our history. Now, with gypsies or Andalusians, or let's just say flamencos, the idea is that there is going to be some kind of duende that you seek, right? And they would talk about it in the old days. They would talk about like, there are two big names who are the guys who Porin talks about them, Gerard. There were two guys. Mairena, I think, is one of them. There are two main guys who were famous.
These are Master de Cantes and who they weren't really big on the
right. But hang on, let me finish it. There are two guys who are very famous as singers, and one of them I think is Mairena, and he was big as sort of someone who gathered the old ways and preserved them and recorded them and could sing a variety of them. I think it's Mairena, but anyway, here's the main point: is that there are two guys. Once upon a time, everybody was arguing about whether or not they were the greatest singers, and they would talk about how one guy, he was just always good and he would perform well and he knew the forms, but he didn't have the duende, right? And then they'd talk about this other singer who came around, and he was very well known for screwing up, for being on and off, for being drunk sometimes and not being able to nail it. But he was thought to be the one where the duende would come. This certain indescribable quality would be called up. And so to wrap here and hand it over to you, Gerard, there's this idea, I think we both agree on this, that to some extent, whatever it is that they call duende, this thing that possesses you in the performance, it's some part of you, some deep, essential part of you that gets expressed in your joy or your pain or whatever it is through your performance. So whereas you see with the African system, where the rhythms and the music and the ecstatic intensity of whatever form, they're designed to subsume the individual and have him or her mounted by one of the god forms. What you see with duende is instead seeking some intrinsic part of yourself that finds expression in this extreme state. So what do you think?
Yeah, you know, again, this is such a deep subject. It's like a well, like a Conte Hondo. What I was going to say is that,
song.
Right, in the West, we've been, I don't want to say afflicted, but there's the Judaic tradition from very, very old that says, if you don't remember, there's a difference between a prophet and being possessed. If you are possessed, you don't remember what happened, right? And that's
a test actually with Voodoo. I mean, they, just to put in little parentheses, they'll test to make sure you're, not only are you not supposed to remember, you're literally not there. To whatever extent you are there, the god isn't, and therefore it's not a real possession. And they'll even come up and test. So they'll take a tube and blow like hot pepper powder and gunpowder and rum into your eyeballs to see if you flinch at it. And if you do, then it's not a proper possession, right? So to your point.
Yeah, and so we've gone to the tradition that says a prophet must remember what he says. Otherwise, you get stoned to death. So there's a really big price to pay.
Right. Let's throw rocks at him until he doesn't move anymore.
So then what we have with flamenco is that we're dealing in a Christian tradition that's, we've been Christian for going on 2,000 years. So you cannot be possessed in Western civilization in the same way that you can be possessed in say West Africa. You
Well,
can't-
there's a specific claim, was it? Maybe it's Maya Deren who talked about it, but there
well,
was
the Divine Horsemen is from Maya Deren because there was no horses in Western Africa. That was her terminology.
right, but there is the idea that they're ridden. The Loas ride.
No, absolutely.
Whether or not
They
she says
ride.
divine horseman. And
Yeah.
there is a specific thing, I heard it said once, I can't remember the source, but the idea was that a Protestant Christian couldn't be possessed in the same,
Right.
but a Catholic could,
No, well,
but a Protestant Christian could not be possessed in the
Holy
same way.
Spirit, and this permeates all of Christianity. That's what the Rocio would do. Right? It's called the Dew, the Pentecost. So yes, you can, but it's different. You can even speak in tongues. I'd say it's a tricky.
But that's possessed by the Holy Spirit, and you don't
Exactly.
necessarily go away.
You possessed by the Holy Spirit, it changes your life. So you don't have a name. You don't name the Spirit. If you can name the Spirit, then this is a lower entity, and you're not supposed to do that. But the Holy Spirit is different because that's really God, or whatever. I don't want to get into like trying to define what it is. But you can be possessed by the Holy Spirit. Now with Duende, it walks that tightrope. When you're possessed by Duende, right? There's no name to it. It's not like you're possessed by Ogun and then the priest will come after you, or you're possessed, by Thor. The priest will
Argue you're possessed by something that is a part of you. Now I know Duende is supposed to be like a
You could
spirit.
say that. So let me give you an example of Lorca. You brought Lorca up. An old guitarist that he had one of the conversations. Lorca was always talking to the Gypsy or the Roma, whatever you want to call it. And the Gitanos, and they're called the Gitanos. And so when Duende comes and possesses you, it comes up out of the ground, up through your feet, up. This is the same thing that Maya Deren says exactly is what happens if we've done ceremonies. That the spirit comes up through the feet, up. Whereas we are sky god worshippers, and we keep thinking it comes down, like even Pentecost, right? It comes down.
Right, the
from
Annunciation.
gods,
Sure.
right? Pentecost, the dove, and the spirit comes. Now, this could just be weird metaphor stuff. We don't have to, read too much into it. But when possession, traditionally, like in Africa, it comes from the feet. It's ground. It's the earth. And Duende is specifically linked to earth. It's linked to earth spirits. And this was in Mexico. I came across a thing, even in National Geographic, where they're talking about an old shaman's cave, blah, blah, blah. And the Indios were there. It was in a cave. So I think one of the reasons that we keep the word Duende is because, yes, it's your personality. It's your deep inspiration. See, there's a word for inspiration. Some people would say, though, Duende goes beyond inspiration. And the modern flamenco community, the young flamenco community of this last generation or so, they don't really want to do much to do with Duende. They say it's all technique. And this really disturbs, to us, we see them and we say, yeah, I can understand why you would say that because that's really all you have. But we won't go there. So let's just talk about Duende as a spirit that was totally talked about and sought after right up to the 60s and 70s, like Donald Porter, one of our heroes, right? The American that went there. He became so involved in flamenco. He loved it so much that he became so respected. I mean, his books, oh my gosh, I forgot to bring it with me. But if you want to read the best book on flamenco, the introductory, it's Donald Porren's A Way of Life.
I'll go see if I have one.
A Way of Life.
Keep talking.
So Donald Porren's A Way of Life, in it, flamenco is centered to everything that he's discussing. And when he talks about flamenco as a way of life, and Duende is the guiding spirit in a sense. Now he was so accepted. He became so enamored of flamenco that the flamencos returned it to him, and he actually took part as a judge in the Bienal. The Bienal is this every 2 years. It's a flamenco. The flamenco. That's a new rendition. That's very good. Yeah, it's a flamenco like contest, concurso, and it happens. It's the best of all Andalusia. The best of all the flamencos go, and to win at the Bienal. All right, yeah. Now I don't have my libraries. I don't have it with me. So, but yes, Donald Porren's A Way of Life would be the best one. Then the other one's Lives and Legends is wonderful. So he became so a part of the flamenco scene, even though he was an American, that he was actually a judge on the Bienal, which means he was actually judging the greatest flamencos of his time. So anyways, it shows you, it was the Washington Carver, the African-American scientist who said, if you love something enough, it'll tell you its secrets. So to him and to many of us and to many flamencos, Duende is still the heart and soul. And without it, it will cease to really continue. It'll become too choreographed. too much of a tablao spectacle, because when you're at a huerga, the whole idea of huerga is to bring the spirit. It's to produce duende, really.
Depending on how you
Party.
you conceive of that, whether or not it's just to have a good time or that sort of thing. But now, before I want to get into the whole.
A good time in a flamenco huerga is that somebody at least gets up and does something that's just like
that leaves everyone like,
yeah, exactly.
Holy shit!
That's what makes a good huerga. So you could say,
right.
Yes, why would you separate having a good time and bringing in the spirit of duende? Right? They're perfectly compatible.
So think of it as deep, first off, because it's supposed to come from the earth and down there, which sort of has its own connotation semantically, the idea of something deep coming up, right? I mean, how much more metaphorically could you go in that direction?
Your own bowels, like you were saying, you're deep inside, your deepest inner self coming out.
Right.
And the idea with flamenco duende is that you're always at war with yourself. Every human's at war with themselves. And that's really the struggle in duende and the struggle in flamenco.
Well, there are a couple things. There are two things for sure that I want to make sure we cover, and they bear upon what you were just talking about, and they're more in your area, and you know more about such things than I do. So perhaps we can begin to dig into them. I'm thinking maybe I'll save my little, minor things about, even and odd and Pythagoras and putting even and odd together, and weird things like how you can construe seguidillas as being 5 and 7 together, and these weird ways that 12 and numbers can be played with. There's other stuff, the technology of a household and raising a given family to produce certain
the
things.
polyrhythm itself is a technology for creating trance.
Right, and so let's head towards sort of two things, and I think you're going to have to kind of cover them both at the same time, because they're so deeply related. I mean, unless I'm mistaken, we'll find out in a second based on what your facial expression is like after I say this. There's the idea of, I call it like emotional modulation. That's probably not the best word, but the idea, or maybe emotional structuring, but the idea of how emotions relate to all of this and why they matter culturally, and this idea of the huerga on the one side, which we've kind of touched on a little bit, and tablao on the other side. Like we could say, we talk about a scene on stage. We'll say, did you look at the tableau, right? It was an interesting tableau, right? It was a bucolic tableau, right? That's like tablao, the idea of this thing that you see up on the stage.
Yeah, table.
On the other side of things, the elevated platform, so that the many can see it, right? And then we have the idea.
Stomp on it.
Right.
Make a lot of noise.
Right, or literally getting up on the table, as they show sometimes. Still, there's like a faruquito clip where he gets up on the table
with their
knuckles playing knuckles
on the table.
But there's something going on there with this idea of the huerga and the tablao, and you've talked about this many times in the past about the sort of the idea of mysteries in the old pagan world versus the public spectacle aspect of what was done in a temple, right? So I'm going to set the stage here, if I may, for just a moment, and then hand it over to you. With the huerga, you have the idea that something that's very, very private. If you don't, it's like the old joke, free for those who can afford it. Like one of the things that I got into, because I wasn't in Spain, but I wanted the closest thing to the experience I could get because I wanted to learn about it. And also it's just so much damn fun. And so what you do is you're hanging out with real flamencos. You want to be invited. You want to be involved. So you do nice things like carry their mic stand or their amp into the place or whatever. You carry gear for them, whatever. Or you do palmas on the stage with them, because you're a buddy and you can do it or whatever. But the whole idea is that you want to be around for what happens afterwards. The really great stuff about flamenco is what happens privately. And if you're having difficulty forming a sense of how all that may work, allow me to say that after a show, everyone who is in the know is trying to find out where the performers and singers are going to go next. They're all trying to figure it out because that's where it's going to be fun. It's going to be great. It's going to be 10 times better than the show. You're going to be right there with them. It's not going to be through microphones. You're going to be sitting around a table with groups of people and bottles of manzanilla piled up on it, right? you're gonna eat with the band after the show because they all want to go get their free food and drinks afterwards in whatever way they can, because it's like a leftover thing from performer culture and gypsy culture, is just to find a way to get the guy who owns the restaurant to lock the door and make it seem so much fun that he continues to bring the bottles of liquor out so that everyone can keep partying, which means that everybody drinks all night for free. And it's a whole aspect of flamenco. How do you get the restaurant guy to lock the doors and like open up the cellar with all the liquor in it? You do it by making it such a good time that he's so happy to be having it happen in his own restaurant that he's perfectly happy to have all this occur. And so you'll be trying to figure out where that's going to happen after the show. And if you're not in the know, no one's going to call you and tell you. You'll literally be sitting around going, oh, I guess nothing happened. And it's because a whole group of people got together and said, no, don't call him. He's no fun. I don't like him. Right. It's very tight. It can be very catty. It's a whole thing with performers. I saw it with taiko drummers too, with live performers and their ranking and their status and their hierarchy and all this stuff. But the point is that it's something for those who have been admitted, who are known, other people can wander in. I'm not trying to say like it's all written in a guidebook somewhere.
The pretty girls are usually always welcome.
Absolutely. And people with tons of money. Going back to the old thing of the aristocrats being patrons of the gypsies. You need someone to hang out with you who pays for everything while you make great music, right? It's the degree to which it really is that way is just shocking. But anyway, it's private and you have to know about it. You have to be invited, which I hope underscores this idea of the juerga to some extent corresponding to the secret ritual or mystery into which you must be initiated. Of course, it's not literally that, but it has a number of aspects that sort of correspond to that. Whereas what happens with the tablao on the raised platform that everybody can come and see is that you just pay at the door. That's what decides it. Can you pay at the door? Fine. You're one of the ones who gets to see what anybody who pays at the door gets to see. And so to a certain extent, I think that corresponds, and now I'll turn it over to you, Gerard, bearing in mind the emotional modulation aspect too, and what happens publicly and privately.
Yeah.
Hang on. The last piece is that with the temple aspect, they literally go up on a raised platform with the pagan gods, and they'll intone whatever they're going to intone. They're going to read the omens and the auspices. They'll look at the liver after they've cut it out and see if it has specks on it, right? They'll look at the flights of the birds, the harospecks or whatever. That aspect is a public show, and it's followed by a public celebration, and like meat gets distributed after the sacrifice and the rest. But that's for everyone who shows up. The mysteries are something set aside that are different. So to a certain extent, the tablao corresponds to the outward show, what is available as an exoteric expression of the art form and its possibilities. Whereas the juerga is more the esoteric, the limited, self-limiting, and therefore more mystery type thing that is available to those who are sort of in. And so you've got on the one, and that's why I showed the clips at the beginning that I did. And again, go see real flamencos. I'm not claiming it at all. But, the idea of us driving around in Gerard's RV and a great guitar's playing and we're drunk and we're having fun with each other and, you get to experience that. Then on the other side, you've got what happens on stage with the show and you do a fin de fiesta. They're two different worlds, but I think they go in a very deep way back to Mediterranean pagan roots and even to some aspects of Christianity. And at the end of the day, I think, and I'm hoping this is what Gerard will talk about more, there is the dimension of emotional structuring. Like, not only are there these phenomena that we've just talked about, the juerga and the tablao, but there's something that they do. There's a function that they serve in our cultures or societies, or at least in the case of flamenco, in its own place, where it came up, what it was for. So can you talk about this idea, juerga versus tablao, and this idea of emotional structuring? And if that's not what it is, please help us to understand what these things do, what they're for in an esoteric sense.
Yes. Well, let me go. Okay, the first thing, the juergas that come after shows are a little bit different, right? They're very much like what you described. They're and they're fine. But juerga itself, yes, private and esoteric, yes. But what we're really looking at is for instance, let's just take it. This is how parents take, right? So let's just say that you are gypsies. You're going through a town, you make your living, you perform for the audience, and you make your music, you want to wow them, make it spectacular, and it's all, tends to be worked out. Then the huerga afterwards is for the family, the tribe. So what are they doing there? Are they just having fun? No, I think we would all agree that it's not just about having fun, because it's too valuable. And you really notice this when you study, for instance, just from anthropology. Let's just take Africa. When there's incredible stress, when there's problems, people will go, like this one study we did with Bushmen or Gypsies, Pygmies. They'll go into the forest. They'll go as far away as they can from social structure, and they will do this for days, sometimes anywhere between 3 and 9. This is a lot of energy and time and resource to spend doing nothing but music. So again, what are we doing? Well, I really like your thing with the mysteries, because we're talking about structuring the emotions. Why? Why is this emotional structuring so important? Well, I've done a lot of work with talking about the relationship, and I can point to a lot of people. My first course on my online with the Jolly Scholar, I touch upon it. There's a relationship between emotions and consciousness. A guy named Damasio discovered that if you cut up, the Enlightenment used to think that the intellect was there was a reality to the intellect devoid of the emotions. And your job was to get the emotions out of the way so that the intellect as true consciousness could flourish.
Right. The typical thing of like the masculine being rational and the feminine being emotional, and these things must be separated in order to keep a clear head, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, they were talking about, that basically your superior consciousness was in your intellect. And what Damasio proved is that there is no intellect floating around in an emotional vacuum. When you block the emotions, you've blocked consciousness. So that's the first key. The second one is the structuring of emotions and the relationship to consciousness. Now, I don't want to go into this too deeply, but when you structure and expand emotions, there's another guy you want to look at. It's called Niels Whalen. And he talked about exactly that. There's a relationship between emotions and late hominids, early humans, in which by expanding the emotional repertoire, we expanded our consciousness. This should be way beyond the scope of discussing this in any depth, but just take it superficially, okay? There's a relationship between emotions and consciousness. Now you look at this tree of forms, and you look at people who are continuously, deliberately cultivating emotional states. When you're cultivating emotional states deliberately, you're actually cultivating a kind of consciousness. When you have an entire repertoire of different forms, then you combine that. With the different forms, you have different emotional nuances, different emotional states. Don't call it sad or happy or miserable. What you call it simply is solear. You could call it golden. You could call it opus one. You call it anything you want. Solear is a structure, a musical structure. To perform it requires if you do it in the right time, you do it correctly, according to the form, as right now is traditional. There's a certain emotion that is established by it. You don't have to call it anything. It's the emotion of solear in that particular time of the tribe or the people's time. The solear of today might not be the same as the solear 2 generations ago, but it's solear. And the way to see it is a kind of emotional structuralism. The solear is distinguished from the bulerías, is distinguished from the alegría, is distinguished from the seguidilla. These are all different emotional states. When you cultivate them, you're reaching back into a tradition that, according to the anthropologist that I'm working with, this is how humans self-modified early on, because they could call up, the first ritual was the musical ritual in which you actually deliberately modified your state of mind. By how? By manipulating your emotions.
This is an example that you have provided in the past. So it's yours, but I want to remind you of it because I think it will help people who aren't understanding precisely what you mean to kind of get their head around it. Look at the idea of going to war, and look at the idea of doing a war dance beforehand to get everyone psyched, so to speak, to go out and fight and kill and face death. They're intentionally modifying their mental state in order to have, and this is very, very important, a survival advantage when they go into battle.
Right. You see, I'm glad you said that, but I'm trying to actually go somewhere else, because the trouble with that one is that you're responding to the environment by that time. I'm saying when humans first got together, and for no reason at all, maybe they're drinking psychedelics. You're not actually responding to your environment anymore. You're actually manipulating your own consciousness for the pleasure of just doing it. So there's a relationship between this emotional cultivation and ecstasy, the ecstatic experience, which is why we always find these, in other words, the musical forms that underlie African culture is the religion. And I think you and I used to talk about this a lot. Flamenco underlies, we thought, we don't know, but that was our assumption, especially when I first started out, gypsy religion. To a certain degree, we can see it in Sevillanas, because the Sevillanas Rocieros, it is the celebration of the beer and the Rocio.
Though of course, not strictly gypsy for our viewers.
Right, that's not gypsy at all. The Sevillanas is really not. So that's what our basic fundamental premise was, in that, like in the Ilahis of the Sufis of Turkey, those of the Mevlevi and the Jarrahi, the wisdom of the Sufis is contained in the lyrics, in the letra, and in their musical forms. So when they go to have service, what do? They sing and they dance.
Yeah, and specific
early Christians, they did the same thing. We still
absolutely. And if I may add another parenthesis, one of the things, like, people are like, well, how come you don't see that, for example, with jazz? And I would argue that you see that noodling intellectualism in the way that jazz has become so attenuated is because they've lost a fundamental set. You and I have talked about this before. It contains basically the idea of the verbal expression through the vocals, but it's something much more than simply verbal, right? It's not just the words of the letra, it's the emotional tone and color of the expression that comes when you speak. There is also the dimension of the rhythm, which is so intense and has so much to do with fundamental aspects of biology and consciousness that we can't even get into it, right? There's also the gesture and dance of the physical person dancing. Then there's the harmonic aspect with the music and the rest, and then bringing them all together to form a whole greater than the sum of its parts. Jazz long ago lost the aspect of the dancing and the gesture. I mean, it's probably at the very latest when you saw jazz dancers performing at the same time as the singers and the bands is probably out by the 60s, well out by that time. Whereas what we see with the flamencos is they keep these core elements, the dance and gesture, which means you form an impression by seeing and participating based on the movement of the person. There's a way in which this says stop without the need for any vocalization or words. It's universal. There's a way this says threat without any need for associated words, and that comes through the gesture and dance. Then we have the verbalization, the speaking, the fact that you can see that if you can hear it, maybe you can glimpse what the letra says, and it says there's a halo around the moon, my love has died. And then you might think about it for a minute, why would there be a halo around the moon? Oh, it's because as I look up at the moon, there's so many tears in my eyes that it causes a halo to appear around it, right? You can think about that dimension. There's the rhythmic dimension. There is the melodic or harmonic dimension, and all these things come together as a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And the last piece of it that I would throw in is that there's the idea with the tablao that you're outside, you pay to get into the box to witness it, right? But it's always like cuckery. You're not actually doing the fucking. You're watching someone else have the fun. But
they're not really either, right? It's experience and representation. The tablao is symbolic. It's what I call the experience versus symbolic, and the entire what I call the ritual spiral within it. So they are symbolically going through all the steps. But the difference between a symbolic and experiential ritual at the far end is like a mass and St. Francis going, or just say St. Francis, would be another one, St. John of the Cross, going into the woods. At the mass, you go, it's so long, now today, is 45 minutes. You perform the mass is done, you participate. If you had a great ecstatic experience, that's fine. If you were bored to death, that's fine. If you fell asleep, that's fine. If you're, whatever you did is fine because it's over, now you go home. And he says, mass is over, mass is ended, go in peace. That's it, it's over. But when St. Francis, when St. John of the Cross goes into the woods, or Buddha or anybody, they do ritual after ritual. It's not really ritual. They're doing practices to try to induce the ecstatic experience. They might get bit by a scorpion and die. They may do this for 2-3 years and come back and say, shit, nothing happened. They may have a great, grand, powerful experience. That's the difference. Nothing may happen. And that's the two. And we could talk about that. That's another, the essence of my dissertation. But let's go on to flamenco again. The huerga has no beginning or end. It just starts going and moving. people are looking for this feeling, this intense feeling. That's what I say. I would argue a little bit with the, it doesn't necessarily have to be, let's describe what we mean by private. It works best when people are all in the same community. They could be on a street corner. They could be anywhere.
But I have to add a little piece. Keep your point. Don't lose it. It's not necessarily private, etc. But with the juerga, anyone who's there is potentially a participant because anyone can do palmas.
Well, that's what I'm saying. As long as you can participate.
Right. Participate rather than simply witness.
No, that's exactly it. That's the difference. The juerga is experiential. And so that's why it so often is private, because everybody there is participating. Even the children are sitting there learning. So this, but to go back even further, what I'm saying for the esoteric part of it is, when you're cultivating an emotional spectrum, you're cultivating a consciousness, a way of life. It's going to be different from the music and the consciousness of other people's, but this will be your heart and soul of your people. And we call it duende. And this duende fills up and awes the rest of the audience when they hear it, when they feel it. They have a thing, the hairs on your neck stand up. There's what they call skin orgasms, I think was what Judith Becker called it. But whatever.
Wait, was Judith Becker a Western anthropologist?
Yeah. Yeah, she's very good, very good. I liked her a lot. But these feelings, it's the cultivation of ecstasy is an X emotion. It's not any particular emotion. We have that with awful and awesome. Once you go, if you go happy, 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 you can get delirious, you can get crazy, and you can set off the opposite. So the ecstatic emotion is where the juergas usually really try to go to eventually. People are crying, and then, they might be laughing. Caracol, I think it was Caracol or Torremoto, would sometimes drink enough and throw up, and then he would sing, supposedly fabulously. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there.
It might have been Caracol versus Mairena, but don't quote me on that. In terms of those two singers and style.
But those two were talking about Gypsy versus Payo, which is totally a different argument. The idea of people being possessed by duende and the cultivation of duende is really across that argument. I mean, Andaluces and Gypsies do this. So that's my point, is that this tree of forms is a complete system of what people traveling through time cultivating their own state of mind. They cultivate their emotions, they cultivate them. And with that, they're cultivating a certain state. Now, we could say, again, if you go with this theory, that's how humans became human, was actually musical practices.
Let me ask you this, because it seemed to be a very major point to you, and I don't fully understand it, which is kind of odd to me because we've talked about this so many times offline and privately. But you seem to be really concerned not to admit, for purposes of this discussion here, the idea that, when I brought up the example of a war dance, that anyone would be doing it in terms of survival advantage as a relationship to circumstances. And wait, hang on.
Drawing a distinction. It's not the same thing. That's
right. Absolutely. But it seems very important to you. So I can immediately see to myself, well, yeah, you could see where anything where you seek the divine or the ecstatic experience, there's going to be some dimension of it, even if it comes up out of the earth, which is literally worldly or earthly, still, nevertheless, there's a dimension of it that's otherworldly. So there's the idea of going beyond, or, when we talk about metaphysics, it literally in Greek just means beyond or above or across that which is physical, right? So, or think about your example of a Christian saint who's going out into the wilderness as a mystic to try to understand something. I can definitely see how you would want, from that perspective, to be able to say, to be able to underscore that this doesn't have to be in response to anything in particular from the world. That's literally what makes it otherworldly.
It's
right?
an inner calling to like Nietzsche would say it, to the stature procession to experience the paradox that lies at the heart of existence, to experience life at a deeper level. And all people have a call to do that. But I'm saying that evolutionary, late hominids, early humans actually may have come to, and again, this is theoretical, come to the consciousness that we call Homo sapien by cultivating their own state of mind.
But why is it so important?
Because it's how we become conscious.
No, not that. Why is it so important? Why was it so important for you? Forgive me, this is just for me to understand your position. Why was it so important for you to strictly delineate that, no, it's not in response to any given thing? Right. I think you said it's just for the hell of it. Why is
no, not for the hell of it. There's a great pleasure, and also look at late hominid, early human. They're responding to the environment. But when they sat around and they all agreed that there was this feeling or whatever, and they say, let's do taka-boom, taka-boom, and all of a sudden they're going into it. There's no purpose into it. It's not to call rain, it's not to get food, it's not to fight an enemy. They're cultivating their own state of mind. It's the first step towards human self-modification.
I see. Your point is that it makes more sense if the thing was done in its own right for itself.
Again, I'm talking about evolution, right?
But see, evolution is immediately the point at which I would say it would be in response in order to gain a survival advantage.
But humans do all kinds of things that doesn't really apply.
Absolutely. Like kill each other.
We respond to our own culture almost more. Humans now are masterful at self-modification. We're going to that right now in transhumanism. I mean, we modify ourselves, and that's how we're evolving.
Yeah, we can even argue that culture itself is the idea of elevating it outside the physical and still having it.
It's a system of self-modification. And so what I'm looking at is that, well, how did that get into play? And then if you look at a lot of culture.
Sorry, just for our people, culture versus cultivate. Culture does come from cultivate, like a plant.
Right, exactly. You're cultivating consciousness, what it is to be human. So the religious experience, the exact experience, is how people come to know themselves as humans in this way. And it always has that without the divine, without the cosmic, it doesn't. You must commune with the divine, and that's what puts everything else into line. That puts the self to the self to the community, the self to the cosmos. And the cosmos has almost no real, in the moment, value, right?
Right. That's why the pagans would say, yeah, there is a one God beyond everything, but it doesn't matter why pray to him, right? And so another thing that you're pointing out is also
why the Aztecs, why the Mayans have a calendar that goes 144,000 years when nobody lives anything close to that. So
right. But what you're underscoring is the importance of the vertical dimension, which is important in and of itself as a thing.
Every religion has it. Every single human culture is based on the ecstatic experience out of which flows the ritual system.
And that vertical access, being independent from the world of things, is part of why you were so careful to say, no, it's not just in response to the
right. Exactly. And so we cultivate our own state of mind. And music is such an excellent way to do that. And when you do that with a group and you cultivate ecstasy, now a lot of people will do that, chanting and breathing and that's fine too. But music means the whole community engages in the ecstatic experience. To the degree that they do, not everybody will. Some people just get drunk and pass out.
To the degree they can participate.
Right. But when they do this enough, there's a reason for it, and they come to this great feeling that says, oh my gosh, this is why we're human. This is what it is valuable in life. And this self-modification, I think, is the root of being human. And there's where these musical systems, like we're so lucky to know flamenco, because in the West, the written traditional, the classical music, which we love it. Believe me, I'm not at all attacking that. But to have contact with a living tradition of a complete musical form traveling through time, that is the flamenco system, it's really one of the luckiest things that ever happened to me in my life.
And one of the me too, to whatever limited extent, because I'm the biggest of the dilettantes, right? I recognize how deep this.
Your dancing was fine, man. It was,
look at the real dancers, but the point I think
Jesus, wasn't that crazy at night? We were in Santa Fe. We used to really hang out with Jesus and just get, kind of wasted and just go on and on and on and on. You really see when Jesus gets filled with Duende. My gosh, what a singer he was!
For real. But this is an interesting thing. You and I have talked about it before, but I want to see if you will touch on it a little bit. In terms of this distinction between the West and the Western musical tradition, which is now based on the score as the guide for everything that everyone must conform to.
But it's all over the world, right? It's not just the West.
Right. But it's an important thing for us because I think that there were many, many traditions once upon a time. I mean, you can look at Welsh dancers getting out there with clogs on, doing footwork. Absolutely. You can look at Irish people doing jigs. I'm bringing these things up.
Those systems, I just don't know. I haven't studied them enough. There's vestiges of them. They're not as alive, in my opinion.
No, flamenco is. And what's so crazy is so much
right here.
And so many leftists have tried to subvert it, and they still get shrugged off because the main current of it is so strong that
against
any
them.
Marxist attempt to
Oh, man,
shift
I
its
could go
shape.
on and on about that. We don't want
Yeah,
to.
but I want to get
They
you a
deliberately
little
attack,
bit.
you know, a guy named Timothy deliberately attack and ridicule the concept of duende, the whole thing. It's
But I want to see if you will talk for a minute about this difference again, not just the West and the West elevated. We got temper tuning and shit. We're post Bach, right, and the rest of his crew, right. There are many amazing things about our orchestral music and our temper tuning and our scores.
it's wonderful.
And yeah, like you said, I'm not casting any aspersions upon it, but I think that there is something that has been lost,
Right.
and flamenco can remind us of what that thing is. So I wonder if you can draw a little bit of the distinction between this tradition. Again, we're not casting aspersions on it. Of the score, of the normative standard of the text, of the idea that we talked about many times in the past about how those musicians don't have any room to flourish, right? You got the first chair violinist who might get to show a little bit. You got the concerto where the pianist might get to show a little bit, right?
No, he shows a lot, but it's all note for note. It's all in his
right. And
it's the audience. The real distinction is the audience. The audience is sitting there passively getting what a guy named Roger called musicated. What we've lost is just simply that. You sit around and people sing happy birthday and they're not in rhythm and they can't sing in tune, right? There's a reason for that, because people used to be able to just all of a sudden, let me give you an example. When I was on the Rocio, there's all kinds of occasions for people to just start "Ole" and just go into clapping the Sevillanas rhythm, which is very simple, just 3s, 6s. I had all of these tapes. I didn't intend to do this, but I did have all these tapes. And I thought, well, just for the heck of it, I remember being at rock and roll concerts, right? You have a drummer sitting there going boom, pa, boom, 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 pa. I mean, you couldn't get a more solid 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, it couldn't be any more solid. And then the guy goes to the audience, and then the audience starts to clap, and you're hearing this. I mean, you're like, Jesus Christ, man, could the beat be any more obvious and you still can't stay on it? So I was at the Rocio and I had all these tapes. And in fact, me and Richard did this. We actually timed them. Richard's really good with rhythm. And we took this out. We compared a week here, another year, another week, a totally different. I mean, people that had just gathered on the corner because they were waiting for another brotherhood to go by. So they had nothing else to do. They just start singing. And immediately everybody could lock into a very, not very complicated, but complicated enough, including contras. Other people would do contras. And they're just doing it. And right lockstep. And what was really interesting too is that the tempo of what they call dance, kind of performance street dance sevillanas, it was almost the same exact tempo every time they did it. And everybody, and these are just total people, strangers, this is crowds, and it was just there. And then when they start singing in estribillo, you don't hear this, everybody's kind of looking for the key. They just, they start singing, and they're all tuned. That's inherited. That's a culture. They inherited the culture. Then again, we have Debussy. And last night, 2 nights ago, I was sitting there with a cigar listening to one of my favorite composers, Scriabin, his poem of ecstasy. I mean, I just love that. But I think as a people, yes, there's been a trade-off that would be really cool to see. Could we bring that back? That the average person can sing in tune like that the average person can clap in rhythm. I don't know.
I will tell you distinctly that to whatever tiny extent, I'm making no claims for myself, but I'm certainly better than the people you talk about who can't clap when somebody's on stage, right?
Your poems are excellent. I mean, a lot of people are so shocked. Your contrasts are better than mine. My contrasts suck. I don't even do them.
But the point is, something has been hammered into me now over time that has to do actually with response times. Because that joke I made earlier on about the shortest unit of measurable time, in Turkey, it's between when the light turns green and when people start honking at you. With flamenco, it's like the shortest possible measurable unit of time is between when you fuck up and when somebody looks over like, what the fuck, where did that come from? Right. And that's another weird thing. You can't tell exactly where it is, but everybody looks around because something's wrong. You know what I'm talking about? It's very much atmospheric. Somebody's like, I can't tell, somebody's fucking up. Who is it, right?
Well, the root of the party, like I said, the huerga will just end if there's too much of that.
Right.
You can't get the groove, and they'll just, okay.
And it falls apart. But the thing is that it teaches you to split time. Like I can do normal contras. For people who don't know, a contra is where, you know, one person's clapping like this, right? But someone, well, we can't do it because there's going to be a delay. Remember, it won't sound clean for our viewers. But you'll be going, and the contra is to come in and go, right? Is to divide it by doubling it, and it creates this ping pong effect. And we maybe talk about that fight that you got into when the contra got all crazy in that Greek restaurant. But anyway, the point is that sorry, I just remember that that was a great fight. Yeah. The point is that you have to split the meter, so it's going taka 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 taka, and
you have to feel the offbeat.
Right, but you have to insert in it perfectly and hold it, and you have to be able to hold it even if the downbeat gets removed. Right. So, and something about that causes you to be sharp and crisp and to be alert and faster. It actually does something. I think if you got a bunch of flamenco dancers together and you like did whatever, you know, attached electrodes to their fucking head or whatever, and like figured out what their response time was, I think they'd be clean off the map for the average audience. And I've even seen with a lot of gypsies where they have no major, any kind of education or, you know, book learning, whatever, they're going to follow a pattern. They're going to smell something. Once you've been around enough, like you were talking about with the forms, how you can kind of feel how the change is coming. You don't know it, you just feel it. And if you turn off the rational mind and just allow that central part of yourself to just flow with it, without this chattering bullshit of the hamster wheel of the intellect.
You have to do. Eventually, that everybody wants to go there. Eventually, that's exactly right.
And it yields an advantage, because I got stopped when I was coming back from Taksim Square one night, and these three Kurds came at me with knives. And I remember there was a weird moment. There was a bunch before it, but there was this one spot where I was trying to go back up through them to get out back to the street. And these three guys are with knives. And at first, I didn't realize they had knives. And I just, from flamenco, they'd move at me and I just turn and they'd go past me and I just turn. But I'm having to deal with three of them. And like most of these people, they fall into soccer mode, where most of the group violence training that comes to people comes from whatever their sports training is, right? So they're trying to surround me like a ball, you know? I mean, they weren't saying that, but you could feel it. You know, you were the object that they as a group were supposed to attend to in some fashion. And something, I swear to God, I was drunk. My poor Ben Sherman shirt got ripped half off my chest and stuff. But I'm turning because they kept trying to grab me. They tore my shirt and I just turned. And as they'd grab, I'd rotate and it would, because of the leverage of it, their hand would be pulled loose from my shirt. Buttons got torn off and stuff. But I just moved through them. And I don't know if it was because I was drunk or whatever, but everything seemed slow. It was like this dance where it was just all slow. And I was like, I mean, it worked out badly because then I thought, but not as happily.
Yeah, it will go too badly.
Yeah, and I didn't get stabbed. But when I was running away from him, it worked out badly because I was thinking to myself, I'm a tall Western man. I distinctly remember thinking to myself, I've got longer legs. These little fuckers can't run as fast as I can. But of course, they all grew up playing football, or soccer. So I'm like running along as fast as I can to get the fuck out of there after I finally got around them. And I'm watching this little Turkish or Kurdish guy running next to me, and his legs are like this long. And I'm like, how come I'm not outpacing you? You know, so that part didn't work out. But the point is that to some extent, the whole idea of that sharpening of the rhythm and the focus and turning off the intellectual mind, you know, going back to the whole idea of, you know, music with a score versus the spontaneous improvisational, right? And the need to turn off the rational mind because the instinctive response is quicker. It really is. You know, you don't think, you just do.
Well, that's what they tell you in all martial arts and all fighting.
Right. And not that I make any claims for myself about that either, but that seems to me to be something like it could sound for the people who are watching like there's something about, this could sound like, oh yeah, great, you could do rhythm better than some other guy who can do rhythm. But
no, they ask more than that.
Well, why do you think boxers work out with a timing bag?
Yeah, no, it changes you. It changes you. I remember that there's a music and neurology was really big 10, 15 years ago, and it still is.
Well, that's your thing about biogenetic structuralism.
Right? Music lights up the brain more than any other activity that we do. That's why there's theories like Niels Whalen and others are really saying that we evolved as human beings. Really, music was, and that's what I was getting to. These rituals that became rituals, they were just behaviors, structured behaviors, in which people were modifying, cultivating states of mind. And this is what eventually, with the repertoire grew, according to Niels Whalen, we become conscious in a higher way than the late hominids. Buy it or not buy it, there's a lot of neurology here that says that. And like you say, the way you hammered that into you, because you used to practice this all the time, it did something to your motor skills. In my in the video that I made, there's a guy, Mathis, does a test, a very brief little experiment, where he simply does these singing exercises for like, I think 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, there was a part of the brain that had thickened. Just by him doing this exercise of singing a certain amount of time every day, but not very much. So the effect of the brain plasticity's relationship to musical behavior, especially performance, is really uncanny.
And I'll throw in there a very quick one. They've done things where they looked at, once upon a time before you had GPS apps on your phone, they had what was called the knowledge, which was the awareness on the part of the taxi drivers in London of every street in the city, because they had to pass very, very challenging exams in order to be able to show that they knew their way around the whole city, right? And so they took these old taxi drivers who had dealt with all those different streets and knew all the different ways and routes and roads, right? And this isn't laid out on a grid like Salt Lake City, right? This is around the Thames, and it's all these, little streets and byways and alleys that have grown up over time and all the rest, right? And they actually cut some of these fuckers open, these taxi drivers opened after they died, and they saw that the hippocampus, which not only deals with memory, but spatial orientation, was physically enlarged.
Yep.
So, I mean, that by way of underscoring your point about
there's activities that work on the brain, and music is one of the easiest, most accessible ways to self-modify the brain that everybody can do. And in other societies, everybody did it all the time. We still do it, but we do it musicated. We don't perform, we listen. And it's fucking us up. It's like the old joke about why don't Baptists have sex? Why don't Baptists fuck standing up? I just don't know.
Because somebody will think they're dancing, right? We have this Protestant culture that militates. Like I've got it's over here. Or I pulled it over.
How about you started? They drove dance out of the Christian. The last dance, actually dance that's done at a mass, is called El Baile de los Seis, the dance of the sixes, and it's from the late Renaissance. That's the only one. There's no dancing done in the Catholic Church.
I'd argue some of that is Counter-Reformation, because you had the Reformation Protestant aspects. Then the Catholics responded and said, "We'll go you one better." But I've got a print over here.
Dance out of the mass pretty early on,
right? But not even just mass. I'm talking about like all aspects of our culture.
Well,
like any cool tough guy is going to be like, "Oh, don't dance. Dancing is for fags." And I'm like,
is really crazy, because in all other cultures that's a mark of masculinity.
And it's a mark. It's a kind. It's not direct, because dance makes things look prettier that in violence don't need to be that pretty. However, in terms of balance, in terms of speed, I mean, just working on things like spins, in terms of orienting yourself when you're turned suddenly.
Never give a sword to a man who can't dance. It's an old Gaelic. I love that one. I love it.
And you know what? You know who still dances? Fucking Irish do.
I think there's more there. They sit around and they still do music together and sing together. Old Protestants do, but it's the Sacred Heart.
That's more like
the Sacred Heart has not done that much.
That's shape note singing, though. They don't dance for it, do they?
No, there's no dancing. There's only singing. It's beautiful. It's powerful. But there's no dancing at all. That would be considered very sinful.
Yeah. But it's strange, because like one of the
stuff is beautiful.
One of the things that stands out for me about flamenco that I've always liked, and why I've never loved, I'm sorry if there's anybody here who's into Latin dance, but I just find it repulsive. I find the ass wagging of men in dance to be repulsive. If a woman's going to wag their ass a little bit, fine. It's a woman. She should, show her assets, right? As it were. But the whole thing with men wagging their asses like monkeys and fools, it's repulsive to me. Now, I will say that there are many Latin dancers I've seen who do that, who are very good with rhythm, who are very fast, who can do things I can't do. So I'm not trying to slight their ability, but the look of it is just gross. But what I like about the flamenco for the males is the same thing that you get with the bullfighters and the rest, which is very much about control, right? The hips are very much controlled. The body's controlled. And you'll get it with male flamenco dancers, also with the female ones to a considerable extent, because they're all very physical. Oh, yeah. But they'll explode into motion and then seize it and stop. Like it's pow and then stop. I've seen it even if you look at squirrels, because I'm the kind of guy that freaks out on this. Squirrel? No, but if you look at squirrels, they're a trip. Actually pay attention to squirrels sometime. What they do is they'll be this was completely unexpected, right? But a squirrel will sit there and be absolutely motionless. And then it'll run, do its thing and freeze. Absolutely freeze. And it's a thing that I've seen in flamenco. I'm not trying to say flamenco dancers look like squirrels. You get me? But there is the idea that there's absolute motionlessness, an explosion of movement, and then the physical control is so good it can seize. It's just like when you bang something with a rasgueado, you're ready to instantly mute it, right? To end the sound, So anyway, these things all occur to me as being very, very interesting indeed. But I've been running my mouth quite a bit. We have a little over 15 minutes left. I would ask you, what kind of things would you want to cover that maybe I missed or that didn't get touched upon? What do you think people need to know if one of our, as we have to imagine is the case, you have many people watching who've never heard about flamenco or anything else, and they're thinking flamenco, esoteric, what? What things would you want to cover that didn't get covered here?
No, I think we did. The main thing we can only leave them is musical systems they're related to to ecstasy, the ecstatic experience. That's why we do it so much. And I would encourage everybody to not just listen to music, but perform, and to do it in groups, and not just a rock band, something that you can get together with 10 or 15 people or just 5 or 6 and perform. It does something to the mind, hopefully rhythmically, so that you also have that aspect emotionally. That's one of the big gifts that flamenco gave to us, is to realize how central that is. African cultures know this. I mean, these musical families of forms it's everywhere. But there's nothing. The classical system, the art music is beautiful. The church is gorgeous, and it does bring us to different states of mind too. I mean, it's cultivating, but it should never have been done at the expense of the people dancing and moving and be able to create music. One last thing: when you go to Burning Man, the biggest thing is electronic dance. Okay, it's pretty cool, electronic dance. I'm not knocking it. But there's one guy or two guys up in this box up there, and everybody down here is just being totally musicated. And if those two guys stop, these people don't know what to do.
I love that term. It's not going away now. Musicated.
Yeah, it's a great word. And he used it sarcastically because this guy was, well, we won't talk about it, Roger, but whatever.
Right, but it's brilliant. I love it. And another point I'd add about that thing, because I long ago noticed it, one of the ways...
A flamenco group, you get together on a street corner, and the first thing people will start doing, we got some time, and they can sing, they can dance, and they can play, they can sing in tune, play just like that. Whereas those people that listen to electronic dance and go to the raves, I love that stuff. I'm not knocking it, but you turn the system off and you say, okay, people, what can you do? They're just wow.
Not a fucking thing. And Nothing. I'll take it one step further, which is how the rhythm works. There is a thing Tim pointed out to me years ago, and it's been borne out as true, is that when you have this system of multiculturalism where you have these various elements together and they've all been forced into the same, what we'd hope would eventually be a melting pot.
Cultural goulash.
Yes. the great cauldron of mystery meat. What happens is, and he pointed this out to me, he said that what first has to happen with these various elements that have been pushed together is they must first lower themselves to find the shared aspect, the common denominator, right? And then go up from there. So take a look at something like rap, right? How now everybody's doing rap. You got your fill in the blanks. It's all rap this, rap that. Now I realize I'm, 10 or 20 years past the point where people made that observation, right?
Rap is hip hop.
Sure, whatever. But the point is that now it's a global thing. The entire earth has to like somehow experience and digest the concerns of urban American blacks as something that theoretically would matter to them, right?
Well, they've changed it. I've seen the Chinese and Japanese, and it's really cool.
Each one of them modifies, and I've seen
that and made it themselves, made it their own. I really admire them for it.
I don't know, admire them, but it works. And I've seen it with the Turks where they'll have a 7/8, they'll have a 9/8 beat that they've worked out with the Turks, and they'll rap to that, which is very cool in terms of being unexpected for us. But I'm after a fundamental point here, which is that in order to drop to this level that we all share, to establish a baseline and then come up again, we can see that in things like electronic dance music. So you don't have a waltz. You don't even have 4/4, although that's the 4/4 is the second most common. 8/8 is probably the third most common, but the first most common is fundamentally dialectical. I can almost see the commies come swarming like verminous cockroaches out of the woodwork whenever I hear a electronic music beat, because what is it? It's just a dialectic. All you hear is
1, 2, 1, 2.
It's just black and white. That's it. And if you ever learn anything about dancing and you decide that you're feeling it, you've had a few drinks, you want to get out and dance, and you get out onto a dance floor and all you hear is you realize you can't do anything.
Well, can't. They can spasticate. I mean, like I say, there's nothing.
Spasticate while they musicate, right?
While they musicate, they start spasticating. Yeah.
But maybe this is the last point about flamenco, because flamenco, I used to think it was called the hiniola. I'm probably misusing the musical expression, but the idea is that within one unit of their structure, let's take the case of Obulidias.
In two, right?
Well, yes, but the idea is that they have the statement and the response. They have the thing that is the call and the response, the setup and the resolution, right? So within 1/12 measure, you got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, right? And then you got 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But the thing is that they, as you told me years ago, they don't actually play that. It will be 1, 2, right? But they'll stretch that. So they'll take the first part, which is the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but they'll stretch it. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Hey, right? So they'll stretch it and answer it. And that is precisely, I'm fucking this up.
Answer to me is too linguistic. I would say they stretch the tension and then boom, release it.
Right? And then control it again, snap it closed again.
Exactly.
Right. And I'm drinking, so I'm not doing good palmas. That's why I told you, Drew, I don't say anything about how good my palmas are. But the point is that they stretch the tension, and build it, and it reaches a release at the end, and everybody feels it.
Don't your palmas get better when you drink? Mine do.
My palmas get better when I'm around good flamencos, because they lock you in and help you be better.
Drinking.
Well, but they're for real. That's why they used to talk about bringing compas. It's not whether you have it, it's whether you bring it, right? And people who are good, when you're around 4 good flamenco people, you just get better because they
drive us.
They lock it in.
Right.
They establish the law. You can just feel it. Nothing blocks them. Nothing screws them up. They just hear you. They don't care because they've got it. They're in the groove. Anyway, the point is that with the there's no room for that expression. There's no room for that development. There's no room for anything to come to life. So I guess that'd be
knock them too much. They've the what's that, with me with names, but there's a certain thing that came out, something based that was, I could see what they were doing. They were really going, they're driving the rhythm and relaxing real life. I mean, it's not that bad. What I'm saying is that the people there on the dance floor, they can't create.
That's as far as they can go.
Right. And some of, there's a groove, there's some cool stuff. Some of these DJs are quite good, but nonetheless, the people can do nothing but what they're doing, but at least they're dancing. Is better than sitting there and the only music you ever know is going to a symphony. As much as you love symphonies, you just sit there,
at least they're dancing.
right?
Yeah,
At least they're moving, however badly or whatever, and spasticated nonetheless, and some are good. But it's not the same thing as making the music yourself, singing it yourself. That's what really affects your brain.
Yes, let us bring it back around to the point you were trying to make. Let's enjoin everyone and invite everyone to further explore rhythm.
Yeah, bring the squirrel.
Bring the squirrel. I'm never going to live that fucking thing down now. You're going to be able to make fun of me later. You'll be like the famous Montoya clan, known for the squirrel.
Oh, did you bring the nuts?
Right. How do you say squirrel in Spanish? Do you know?
Oh my God! Wait. I forgot.
All right, good. It's probably better. Anyway, you can see I'm blushing because if anybody who's an actual Flamenco, they'll come along and mock me. But the point is, yes, embrace the aspect of rhythm, embrace the aspect of dance, embrace the aspect of doing it together,
singing,
embrace the aspect of not being a cuck and watching it, but being a part of it. It doesn't matter if you're getting into capoeira playing a fucking berimbau and congas. It doesn't matter if it's flat and scruggs and you've got, banjo. That's excellent shit. That's flamenco, whatever it is, make the music yourselves, make it together, and attempt to include all the elements to rebuild them. Again, as I just said, gesture, dance, the lyrics, the vocal music, the rhythm itself, and then the harmony and melody. Bring it all back together. Put the dancing back in. Huh?
Ardilla.
Ardilla?
It's a squirrel.
Is it a squirrel?
So no, you're saying it right. And this is something that, again, we've talked a little bit about, resistance culture, what we're trying to do with right wing. And I think this is a very important part. It's at least something that people to think about, to cultivate. If they're going to create a community of resistance, music is a powerful, powerful way to do that. And for people not to underestimate just how powerful it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Cultivating the ecstatic experience.
You've got chained lightning in your hands. You've got arguably one of the tools that allowed us to elevate ourselves,
right,
at beyond all these other. Well, elevate. Let's use that in a qualified way. I don't want to get way off into anthropocentrism, but it was a way in which we could become self-modifiers, as Gerard was saying it earlier, and we have that within our hands. And yet we're just jerking off to whatever MP3 we download that we passively consume. When in fact the most wonderful, beautiful thing about music.
Consume it. That's the term, and that's the problem. If they do a certain amount of that, even the people that really started going to symphonies, they could only do that so much. I mean, the symphony wasn't every night. At their homes, they played piano, they sang,
absolutely,
sang in groups. In the 1800s, everybody could dance. No gentleman was considered a gentleman who couldn't write poetry and dance. I mean, this was considered, you had to do that. It's only lately that stopped. And that's really, it is a shame. It's too bad. It's a loss. It is a loss. And the gain of the symphony and listening to Wagner and listening to Scriabin and Debussy, yes, that's gorgeous, but it's not a substitute for the average person being able to move, dance, sing, cultivate his own emotional states and do that.
And take it to where it goes. Yeah. And even if that means getting out on your porch or getting out in front of on the deck in front of your double wide with a banjo and a washboard or whatever it is.
Shoot those squirrels.
Absolutely. I'm not going to live the squirrel thing down now. I'm fucked. Okay, Gerard.
Unless you have any questions.
We don't. We've got 4 minutes left. So all I'm going to ask you to do is, first off, on behalf of Gerard, our wonderful guest, thank you for being here. I want to invite everyone to go over and check out his channel, especially his stuff on Pete Seeger and commies trying to take over country music and things like that, Appalachian music. Go and follow JollyScholar888. That is his channel. He's a dear old friend of mine. Check it out. In addition to that, Gerard, is there anything very quickly that you would want to say about what you have coming up next or that you want to promote?
No, right now I'm working on, I'm doing some dispatching. I'm working right now on the second and third Great Awakening, which I'll have in a couple of days. And I'm leading up to something. There's a reason why I did the Seeger, why I did the Great Awakenings, because it's obviously leading towards what we call woke culture and also intentional communities, which is really interesting that everything we call intentional communities was actually formulated back in the 1800s. And there's some fabulous intentional, what we would call, if nobody's heard about the Oneida group, that's one of the most interesting phenomena. I think everybody will be fascinated by it.
Oneida?
Oneida, yeah.
Not tied to Oneida, Tennessee.
No, it's Oneida, New York, and the silverware Oneida is a direct result of it.
All right.
Byproduct.
Cool. Well, then everybody, please check out my dear old friend Gerard's channel, JollyScholar888. I thank you all for being here. I thank you for your patience. I thank you for joining us for all of this. And until next time, I guess that's all. And this is Semiagog out.